I'd like to start off with a song I wrote, and this is called Milo Holt's Memory Lane.
We grew up in Georgia, New Jersey, Virginia, and North Carolina. He always had a sense of rhythm. He moved with a sense of rhythm. He'd tap on things. And he could play, a plate, a glass, he could make noise with anything. So he was very experimental and very precocious.
I think he gets it from his mom, who was an incredible artist. Mary Todd Shaw, I think, the way she brought him up, I think he just got that inventiveness and the creative, side of him from his mom, and he would just go with it.
And she was very out of the box, too. She and George were incredibly alike. I mean, he was her mirror image.
And he had this crazy relationship with his mother, who was a brilliant artist herself. She was hard of hearing, and she had this particular way of talking. And George used to mock her mercilessly, and she laughed her head off.
He was a little devilish, and you had to keep your eye on him. He told me once, we were listening to some music, and he said, "Did you hear that blue?" I said, "Excuse me? Did you hear the blue?" "Well, it's red now." I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Music has color." And that was early, before he started into music. He perceived it differently.
We Willhelms are perfectly happy going over to somebody's house and not having any conversation at all if there's good music playing.
Very musical household. And Mom was always playing music around the house, and so, very good in that regard. So John was in a number of bands after we moved down here from Ohio, and they always practiced at the house. John always had his drum set set up at the house.
I remember his bands practicing in our house on Haxton Drive in Dayton, playing these awful songs. And all the neighborhood girls would come around. It was perfect, garage band kind of a thing. And everybody stand around approvingly, and listen to little Johnny Drum. After we moved down from Ohio, John had sort of a difficult adjustment period. There was sort of got a little rebellious, running with the crowd and angry. I think he was actually arrested one time for stealing some records from a Clark's department store. That was a real controversy. What are we going to do with John? Oh my God, I can remember Mom and Dad sitting on the living room floor. He didn't have a job, but he needed music.
The hardest move was the move that we made here to Charlotte, because he was in junior high and I was in the middle of the 10th grade. And Charlotte was far advanced over where we've been. We've been in a small mountain town in Virginia. I think it's harder on a boy. There's a lot of competition among boys. I think that removed his sense of belonging and sense of place at a pivotal time in his life. And so he floundered a bit and maybe got into a little bit of trouble.
George is a strange guy. He's got this army jacket on and he's got ironed hair. His hair is straight as an arrow. And he says, "Can I play your guitar?" And George takes the guitar and flips it over and starts playing it left-handed without doing anything at all. And he's not just playing, he's wailing.
When he started playing the guitar, he found musicians and he found his bliss.
I was friends with George from high school. He was very fun. He was really crazy, almost like a pixie, very mischievous. He was up for anything. He would have these weird ideas and just do crazy stuff and sneak out at night, and he was just an impish personality.
He connected with friends, and they started having band sessions in our basement, which was right outside. The door to the basement stairs was right outside my bedroom. So I don't know how many times I would open that door and scream, "Shut up!"
It was that cliche of people having bands in their basements. Whoever had a basement, go to their house because they had a basement and people could play loud, I try to tell young kids today, it's like, it was fun, man, and what was fun about it? It was the music.
I remember John met George, I believe, at East Mecklenburg High School.
I knew of George because he'd come over to the house a couple times and they'd listen to records and that kind of stuff. I do know that John, during that period, after George came into the picture, really started developing a discipline. I think he found, I think they fed off of each other that way, and realizing what he needed to do to become a successful artist.
John kind of mellowed George out because George was like really high energy.
John was very grounded. I think of John as the anchor, and George was the kite or the sail. I think John really helped George ground himself, and I think George helped John open up and flower. I think they were a perfect match.
When I met them, they were like this. You never saw one without the other almost. I didn't really sense any conflict there ever, but it was just the way their personalities came together. George was pretty much the predominant one and John was the supporting one, but contributing. It wasn't like he was just a yes man. Certainly he contributed.
Friendly people, great guys to hang out with and work with, and just so creative.
George and John were living together in an apartment at the time, and I had just moved over to that side of town. And so we were very close in proximity to get over there, and so we started rehearsing intensely. And when you have like minds, it doesn't take long for everybody to really figure out that this is a cool groove.
It's just great to be around and go over to their apartment. And a lot of times it was just to go over and listen to music.
They were listed in the phone book as John in George, John and George, because that's what they were.
In other words, there was just, stuff all over the place. The instruments were set up. There was a sofa pushed up right next to it. You kind of had to climb over drums to get to the sofa and that kind of stuff, and amps all over the place, and always albums thrown all over the place, and little notes. Notes and drawings.
George was always the one that came up with the wild ideas, though. He had the criminal brain.
We'd get thrown out of restaurants, because George had long hair and hippies were not allowed in places, and it seems like it was all fun.
One time, George and John and I went into a McDonald's on a Friday night after a football game, which we didn't know anything about, but the place was packed, and I had an accordion, and John had the bagpipe, not the bags, but the part that goes with the bagpipes. And George had a violin, and we were actually picking out and playing songs for these people until we got thrown out. What we found out in the three of us was that we could all sing together, we could play things together.
Another interesting thing about both of them is, especially George, was that he didn't really have any vices. It wasn't that he was puritanical or abstemious, but he was just so absolutely, utterly focused on his music that all the distractions that are so alluring to so many musicians were irrelevant.
And I am the luckiest guy around. Everyone, both near and far, searches for a guiding star.
George and John and myself and Pat Walters and David Floyd and a bunch of other people all started sort of going into jazz. The biggest reason was because we hated disco. It was ruining the band business because all you needed for disco was a disc jockey.
He could play any type of music, but when he found jazz, that really excited him.
There were not that many musicians playing jazz. It was frowned upon in lots of places, you know. Jazz was just thought of as kind of a, pardon the expression, a bastard form of music, you know.
Charlotte was just really starting to open up to jazz. You know, there was emerging from sort of the blackness of the jazz and the whiteness of the fusion into a whole other type of music, and Charlotte was very receptive and open to that.
Well, the music scene was, of course, compared to New York, there wasn't a lot going on. There was a few things. Really, Bill Hanna was probably one of the few full-time jazz players, and there was a handful of other guys, but he would actually conduct jam sessions, and being that he was a school teacher, he let a lot of local players come sit in.
I used to have sessions at my house, okay, and people would come and play. This is where I met George. He would come to my house. I lived on Crater Street, and I had a full basement underneath this house, and I turned it into a club. Basically, you know, I called it Crater Street East. He was always, you know, and John, John would come to my house with George and come to the sessions, you know, down in my basement and play, and John had great time, you know, good time, good feel, everything.
So I got kind of introduced to a lot of musicians through those jam sessions because it was kind of a networking thing. You know, you meet a lot of people and then you start to play together, and then you have sessions here and you do this and you do that.
So we're all trying to learn the same type of jazz tunes that guys were learning at the time. And we're all exchanging and taking notes and hearing each other and playing up, trying to absorb what the other guy's doing.
I was probably 30 years old when I met George, all right, and he was like in high school, 10th, 11th grade or something. I don't remember exactly where he was in high school. We just loved the way he played, but he was a little different from the rest of the folks. He was not a bebop player, you might say, you know. He was more a fusion player, and coming up with the strangest sounds you've ever heard in your life, you know, but yet they were musical. To be perfectly honest with you, I kind of, under my breath, laughed at it, you know. It just didn't sound like anything that I'd heard.
Hey, John!
What?
We all kind of, I don't know, I don't hate to use the word scoffed at the music, but we didn't, you know, we weren't ready to accept it in that particular genre, you know, or what we were doing. It always seemed to be a little bit different.
When he went on a solo, you never knew where he was going to take you. I mean, he would start out and build it, and it would go, and it would just go on, and it would be very fluid, and that's the way he was as a person.
He was just really fascinating to me because I come from a musical background where mostly what I played is rhythm and blues. And here's George into all this different kinds of stuff, you know. And musically, there was a lot going on in the early 70s. Mahavishnu had come out, and the rock scene was starting up, or had progressed to the point where it was. But it was just it was almost like meeting somebody from a foreign country or something. And it was really interesting to hear him talk about what he thought about music and what he thought about things. I remember one time I was talking about having trouble putting a composition together, and I said, George, you know, how do you get inspired? He says, well, you know, I could just look up and see 3 trees and think, okay, I can do a composition in 3 parts. And I thought, okay, that makes sense in kind of a tangential kind of way. But he had that kind of mind that he could create. I mean, his creativity level was so high to me that he could make something out of anything.
So I said, what are you hearing? You know, where are you getting this? You know, and he'd say, it's coming here, you know, and here. You know, what else can you say? I mean, because people that pioneer new ways of doing music, they're always thought of as kind of off the wall, maybe, you know.
Studied all the theory and all that kind of stuff. So I'm coming from this very structured background and, you know, follow all the rules. And George that was the furthest thing from his mind. Man, he's like, oh, wow, this sounds good. I'm going to use that. And I would look at the same thing going, okay, how does that fit into this? And does this fit the puzzle over it? And he didn't care about any of that stuff, man. It's just like, oh, look what I found. Isn't this cool?
We should not have made fun of it, you know, and I look back upon it now and no, that's not the way to think. You know, let people explore and expound and do what they do, you know, and go with that.
George always kind of stood out because he had this incredible ear. I mean, he could hear anything, and then he knew what to do with it when he used the guitar. You know, he had a very unique style.
So he could do stuff that a normal guitar player playing right-handed, right side up, would find difficult to do, but because he played the way he played, it was very easy. So he had a different take on the instrument itself and the concept of playing the instrument.
The fact that he did play left-handed, he was able to do some things that you couldn't really do right-handed. But then he was also handicapped because there was a lot, you know, guitar is really designed to have the lower strings on the bottom, and because they were up on the or what I call the bottom is the, you know, really the top. But when you flip it over, the strings are down here, and it's not designed for your fingers to play those bass notes on the chords and play the top chords easily. So he struggled with that, and he told me that was his biggest thing. That's why he really started playing more piano and less guitar.
This is called Coney Island, and I hope you enjoy it.
He wrote beautiful music, beautiful songs that still stick in your mind, you know. Probably my favorites are Guiding Star and Coney Island. Those two were just phenomenal. But he wrote very romantic songs. To be such a mischievous, kind of a troublemaker, impish sort of person, he had a very sweet romantic side that came out in his music.
They had a beautiful voice, an incredible vocal facility.
Breeze and nights and leaves, seeing this night's blowing.
They were looking for a third wheel, and with what they were doing, and I went over to do an audition. I think Carl Firstman was there too. We hit it off, and so I joined their band, Moose Magic.
Tell me, how long has Moose Magic been together now?
Well, that's a good question. John and I have been together for many years, but Chip is the newest addition to our band. He's been with the band for about 4 to 5 months now.
And George was very aggressive about getting gigs, and of course we were really good. We were starting to go all over the South, really, not just Charlotte, but in the state of North Carolina, but getting out of state and going to different places, playing gigs that paid us more. And it was just the three of us. We traveled in my car, so we had low overhead. You know, we were multi-instrumentalists, so we could put on a whole show for you.
Oh, another thing that really was cool is the white guys and the black guys all hung out and played together, and you know, showed up to the same clubs together, which I really thought was pretty cool. Given, you know, this is the South and race relations being what they are, musicians, you know, there's no color. I mean, we just play. And if you can play, you're cool.
When I was moving down there as a black guy coming out of, you know, the North and all this stuff from New Jersey, I was skeptical. My wife was white at the time, and I was very skeptical about how we would be received in the South. And so, no, it was great. I didn't have any problems down there.
They did a lot of experimental things. I remember one that John and George did that was like an old kind of 20s Rudy Valley sounding kind of thing, and they wanted it to sound like an old record. So they found a faulty mic cable that crackled, and it made this perfect sound that sounded like an old record, and they rolled it between their hands and made this crackling noise that they put on the track, so that it sounded like a really old, you know, kind of thing. That was hilarious. And they did a Salvation Army band that was badly out of tune. That was so hysterical.
They did write a lot of serious music, but they themselves were really funny, and they always wanted to goof off, and they just wanted to have fun.
George and John and I one time went on the radio live, and we actually had just thrown together this cute little song. On September 3rd, the leaves come tumbling down.
On September 2nd, the leaves come tumbling down. Will be leaving this old town.
And even during their shows, the shows were all about having fun.
I guess you'd call this more or less Western swing.
George would write these signs, and he would hold them up throughout the shows. I think there were signs that said, "Be jovial."
They were really, really well known in Charlotte, especially in the music circles. I mean, they were right up there in the top tier of players in town. And about the same time, the Double Door Inn opened up. I think it opened up in, was it 73 maybe?
We opened up as just a neighborhood bar, and gradually there were customers that were players, and they would say, "Hey, you know, how about if we could play?" You know. So we thought about it, and we said, "Okay." I love to get the locals in here and give them a chance. So it just progressed from there, just word of mouth. People came in to play, signed up, and got up there and played.
But the Double Door was just, I mean, it was the perfect place to hear that kind of jazz music.
Moose Magic was, they were already a band before we opened. And this was at the very beginning of our musical, our live music history. I mean, the very beginning. Our stage wasn't even built yet. And the one thing that amazed me was how highly revered they were amongst other musicians.
Vassar Clemens was in Charlotte one night when they're having some, country event, and Moose Magic, George, John, and I were playing Chicoria music at the Double Door, and Vassar walks in and says, "Hey, can I sit in?" And we're like, "Dude, absolutely."
They were approaching not legendary status necessarily, but they had approached a level that I don't think anybody had reached in Charlotte.
Everyone, both near and
But that kind of energy is a real beacon for a lot of us. It's inspiring.
That's a thing that I loved, is the fact that they just covered, apart from just their own jazz music. I would go and, here's some Christian rock albums they played on, or just Christian music. And then, here's a poster for this Lisa movie with an axe in it and blood coming out the doors. They did that music. I didn't even know that they were doing music for a movie until I remember one day, I think they came over, and I think George rolled out this poster on our dining room table. And I remember my parents were I could tell they were sort of half trying to get me not to look at it. I was like, what? No, I want to see it. I was probably 6 or 7. And I'm looking, and I was like, wow, there's this big, scary looking house, and there's an axe in the roof, and there's blood pouring out the doors. I'm like, whoa, what is that? And I think to sort of get my attention away from that, they said, John and George did the music for this movie. I was like, oh, cool.
I think we read an ad in the paper that there was auditions for a film, and that was unusual for that time and for here. And I think it was at a hotel or an office building. It was just very unglamorous.
The producer's name is Pat Patterson. He's a local Charlotte producer, did such great movies as Blood Feast, crazy chain-smoking producer that lit his cigarette with the burning end of the stub he had just finished smoking. And he used to say, you know, like my movies or not, they're all playing in drive-in theaters all over the country. So, and he had this young director named Rick Friedel.
But I remember it was clear from early on that Rick said to me, so there's not really anything for you. I'm sure you're a good actress, but would you like to work on it? What do you mean, as crew? I said, okay. Pat
Patterson gave a big long spiel about you might not make any money, but you're going to get a very good education. Well, he paid us, but he just didn't pay us a lot. And I did get a good education. I know what a grip is now.
And I had to, fetch the blood. Like get the fake blood and bring it over to the makeup guy.
Oh, God. We had a good time. I was the sound engineer. George, in the meantime, talked Rick into letting him and John do the music on this movie.
I believe George Newman Shaw and John Willhelm might have come to the audition, the open audition for the movie. And after speaking with them and finding out they were musicians and very good with sound, George became the sound man. And when it came time to do the music, George said he thinks he could score it. And I said, well, we really don't have any money. And he said, that's fine. It'll just be fun to do. And by that time, I think he'd already been helping me with sound effects. And it was very hard to not be impressed by just, his sort of overwhelming creativity. So when it came time to do the score, we just went into a sound studio for, I think the first time we could only afford maybe 8 hours or something. And he brought in his synthesizer and John brought in all of his instruments. And we just said, okay, we're coming out with a music score. And we wrote, they wrote a lot of the original songs. I think I remember us, working together on lyrics. George had a wicked sense of humor, so did John. So a lot of the songs in acts were done as counterpoint. In the midst of watching these cold-blooded killers, you were hearing the most off-the-wall kind of humorous country and western songs.
My mother, she done told me what to do.
They then scored the second movie as well.
Now will you shut up? When I started hearing the fruits of their labor, I couldn't get over how professional it sounded. And then I thought, my God, these guys are developing a whole new career outside of performing.
They were both such naturals and gifted and held in such awe by all of their compatriots there and their fellow musicians that I just, had this feeling that all they needed to do was just sort of have an outlet and exposure, and the world would find them.
A guy named John Gelinas really liked what they were up to, and they started recording song after song after song.
I saw them at the school at Central Piedmont, at the music building, and we were just hanging around out front, just chatting and talking about and wanting to get into the studio, and they told me they were going to the studio next week, and so that was the last time I saw them.
I went to sleep, and my brother was murdered in a drug deal out in Tucson, Arizona, the previous year. And I hadn't dreamt about him or anything, and I had this, it was literally a vision that I was in my old house in Baltimore, and my murdered brother came to see me, and just to say hello, and I said, well, what is heaven like? And I said, well, how did you know I didn't go somewhere else? And I said, well, I hope you went to heaven. He says, well, do you like the mountains? And I said, yeah, I love the mountains. And he said, well, it's like the mountains, but actually I find it kind of boring. And he said, listen, I've got to go back and greet the new arrivals.
April 22nd, 1976, I woke up at 1:30 and I sat straight up in bed and I thought, ooh, that's a strange feeling. I just didn't feel good. What was that?
My roommate and I were in the dorm room, and we had this, it's NC State. We had this black light on the wall over the stereo, like every dorm room in the college had at the time. Big 4-foot-long thing stuck up there with two-sided tape. And at 1:30 in the morning, we turned the lights off and we're just falling asleep, and the light came off the wall and it landed on the stereo. It created this horrendous glass-shattering, metal-crunching sound that just I'll never forget.
I remember sitting in the dining room, and this was before the days of cell phones, and one of the waiters came in and said, are you Lenore Firstman? And I said, yes. And he said, you have a phone call. I was like, really? Why would somebody be calling me here? You know, who knows I'm here, first of all. And that just seemed ominous to me. So I came out, and it was my sister Joan, and she said, have sad news for you. And I said, yeah, what happened? She said, George and John were killed.
They stopped for a hot dog. George made a phone call. They got back in the car, and just a short distance down the road, a truck plowed into them.
I got the morning paper and opened it and just almost fainted. It was a real shock. It was hard. I just felt I felt like they were cheated and that we were all cheated. We were all cheated.
The driver, who had a terrible record, fell asleep. He'd been driving for a long period of time that day. He fell asleep at the wheel and just ran into, it was a little Volkswagen.
The trucking company immediately cleaned up the scene and removed evidence.
2 days later, the truck was fixed, so even the cops didn't have a chance to see what kind of damage was on the truck. It turned out that the truck driver had a record as long as your arm, and it turned out that the trucking company had a record for hiring those guys.
The why and the where was like, why? Was it the truck driver's fault? Was it George's fault? Will we ever get to the bottom of that? After a while, you just go, kind of like, it's just a major loss. It doesn't matter how or why. Like, it won't make up. It doesn't make up for that person being like taken away. And it's just, you know, you have them. We have to always remember to be grateful.
I know that, for sure, one of the normal thoughts that I had when I first heard about it was, why wasn't I with him when this happened? You know, we were that close. I don't think I'll ever have a male bonding relationship with anybody like that. I'm not sure if I'll have a artistic friendship with anybody like that again.
And the whole community music community was just devastated.
It was like the end of the world. I mean, you just knew from that point on it was never going to be the same. The music scene would never be the same here.
They were the sort of leading light luminaries, or the interstitial glue that held us all together.
I mean, I knew that they were popular, but it really wasn't until the funeral that I realized just how popular they were.
One of the policemen remarked to me when we got to the cemetery, I have never seen a line that long. This is more cars than I have ever seen at a funeral.
You know, I'm from the South, the land of guns, alcohol, and fast cars. And I don't know how many of my friends have met premature ends, but none has really devastated me and so many other people. And to this day, I haven't really come to grips of it, of the unfulfilled potential that George and John represented.
They just seemed to be going up, 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 and you know, they were 22 at the time, which I also remember as a kid thinking, God, that's so old. And now, like, oh my God, they were just little kids. And yeah, I always wonder what, you know, you can always wonder what could have been, but I can't imagine it being anything less than pretty stellar.
They were so creative. They couldn't not create. They had to create. It was like breathing for them. And we were all willing to go along, you know. Whenever they said, can you come do this or that, we were all willing to do whatever we could to help. So, but gosh, I miss them. And I think about them all the time, to this day, after all these years.
Those people don't appear a lot. So you know that they're, you know, a gift.
That guitar there, you know, I remember seeing him play that guitar a lot, and I wound up getting that guitar from his mother. It still gets used today. It's a great guitar, and I love it. I'd never get rid of it.
But yeah, man, this is a great George's little Wurlitzer piano. Very cool. This keyboard is what George worked on when he was composing the music for the movie.